So you're saying had your wife, you're talking about the intervention that took place. Could you just talk about leading up to the intervention, some of the things that you were doing and thinking that no one saw
Yeah.
what was going on?
Well, let me clarify some things. Addiction is a very subtle um, entity that happens when you are when your body and your mind and your spirit are open to um, addictive qualities, which can be passed down through the generations, through the genes. Not only can you become an addict or an alcoholic because of your genes, but you can also become an addict or an alcoholic because of constant use. A person can drink but not become an alcoholic if they don't drink on a regular basis. If you drink on a regular basis, you can acquire um, the the, the state of being addicted to alcohol. Just because you smoke cigarettes doesn't mean that you have to be addicted to smoking cigarettes or addicted to marijuana or addicted to drugs. But if you do it on a consistent basis, seeing that the qualities of the drug or the alcohol that you're using has addictive qualities, you can become addictive over use. Addiction runs in my family. I found that out when I later on, um, but when I got married in 1981, my wife knew that I was drinking. So I guess you figure I was drinking sociably. My wife doesn't drink. She might have had a half a beer in her lifetime. Never smoked cigarettes, never used any type of illicit drugs. So when we got married, she thought that because she married me that I was going to stop drinking and stop smoking. And if you are listening to this and you think that because you your husband loves you or your wife loves you, and that when you get married that you're going to change them, duh, it ain't gonna happen. It's not. It's not. And so I disciplined myself not to smoke around my wife. But when we went out, if I drank, she didn't like it, but I still drank. But I tried to respect the fact that she didn't like cigarettes, so I didn't smoke cigarettes around her. Never used a drink, never used drugs around her, like cocaine, heroin, marijuana, and any of that nature. I would go out and do it. Go outside or down the woods or someplace. But I was pastoring a large church in Baltimore in the early 1980s, and there were drugs all around the neighborhood. As a matter of fact, the church was located on Monroe and Monroe and Lexington Street. And a half a block down the street on Monroe and Fayette was one of the most notorious blocks, the most notorious corners in the city for selling drugs. As a matter of fact, there was a movie written by Charles Dutton entitled "The Corner," and the corner was actually Monroe and Fayette Street. And so that was a half a block away from where we lived. We lived right next door to the church. But while I was pastoring that church, I never wanted to pastor a church in Baltimore because I grew up in Baltimore from the age of 13, and I've done a lot of things in Baltimore, and so I'm pastoring this church in Baltimore. My addiction is escalating. My wife didn't know I was using drugs. She didn't know I was using drugs until 7 years after we were married. One day I came home and I went into my sock drawer looking for some joints. Joints, that's marijuana. Rolled up joints, and they were gone. And I asked her about them, and she played dumb, like she didn't know what I was talking about. And so she found out I was using drugs, and she was very much disappointed with that, and she bugged me about stop using, not all that sort of thing. and I knew she had a mind to go to the bishop. I was a United Methodist pastor at that time. And I told her that if she went to the bishop and told the bishop that I was using drugs, that I would kill her. Just in case you don't know it, drugs will alter your thinking, your perception, your attitudes. Drugs can make you crazy. Alcohol is a drug. And so my wife went behind. She convinced me to go to this counselor. I was going to this counselor, an Episcopal priest. And I was going to him and stopped using every now and then, but then I couldn't stop using. And then on October the 13th, 1988, there was a knock at my door, 9 o'clock in the morning. And I went to answer the door, and there was my mother standing there, there was my sister standing there, and I'm going to let them in. I wanted to know, why are you at my house this time in the morning? And then before I could close the door, behind them came my mother-in-law, my best friend, he was another pastor. We had gone to seminary together, and there were two elders from the United Methodist Church, and then this white Episcopal priest that I had been lying to, and I knew something was up. And so this white Episcopal priest was the one who was leading this whole intervention in my life. Took me in the living room, went around the circle, and everybody let me know that they knew I was using, and they were concerned about me, and everybody ended their little statement with, "And everything will be all right if you do the right thing." And so finally I said, "Well, what is the right thing?" And they said, "Well, you need to go into treatment today." And it just so happened that I had been sitting in my kitchen talking to this man who was supposed to be coming and putting some fencing up around my property, because I had just bought this farm, and I had bought this racehorse, and I wanted to bring him home. And he was supposed to put fencing up around this. And when they came in, the Episcopal priest put this guy out, and so I said, "No, I can't go into treatment today because I got to do da. And they let me know that the bishop knew about this, and I hit the ceiling. And one of the things that the Episcopal priest had told my wife, had told her to remove all guns out of the house. And so I guess she thought maybe I might have kept my word about killing her. And so when I hit the ceiling, I was sitting on the couch, and when they said that the bishop knew, it was like I jumped up and my head almost hit the ceiling. But I had to go. So I went into treatment that day. To Bel Air, Maryland. My best friend drove me up there. It was the best thing that ever happened to me in my life, other than giving my life to Christ and marrying my wife. And so I guess it must have been about a year and a half after I went into treatment that I started writing this first book, The Pipe in the Pulpit. And it took me 25 years to write this book. And that's because I was not really dedicated to writing it, but I was dedicated to being in recovery. Started a radio broadcast in 1992. I realized why God did not bring me out of active addiction sooner. I found that out after He did bring me out. And the reason why He allowed me to go through active addiction for so long, is to prepare me for what I'm doing today. very much dedicated to giving people hope because there are 100,000 people who are dying every year in America from drug overdoses. That's not including homicides, suicides. I have buried, I don't know how many people who died from the direct use or directly from drugs. When I got clean, and I was pastoring this church in Baltimore, the members of the church showed me how church people really are. And church people are human. Just because a person proclaims Christ does not mean that all church people are not judgmental. And I found out after I got clean and still was preaching to members of my congregation, I realized after a couple of years staying at that church, because the bishop gave me the opportunity of moving to another church after I went into treatment. But I stayed there, and that's one of the best things that ever happened to me in my life. I stood up where I fell down. That takes a lot of God. That takes a lot of stamina. And I found out that the people in my church who treated me the dirtiest were individuals who were either closet addicts and alcoholics themselves, or they had children or relatives who were addicts and alcoholics, and they couldn't do anything with them. And so they projected all of their pain and hurt on me.
They call it, a way that they sum it up in the street is they say, you hate what you see in yourself.
Really, yeah. So,
let me ask you a question. Do you think that most people, because you said back in your, you sold clothes and then you started to sell drugs at some point. Do you think when you were starting to sell drugs, although the setup and the priming, the seeding to become addicted to drugs was already there, because you said you took your first drink at 13. So although you had already been exposed to that lifestyle, the lifestyle of consuming drugs, because drugs and alcohol, you consume it for the same reason, to kind of escape your reality, or to take the stress away, or sometimes to take the pain away, or sometimes just to have a good time. So do you believe that the time period that when you were selling, did you ever see yourself becoming the person that you were selling to?
No. I believed a lie that is perpetrated throughout the community, and that is addicts and alcoholics are individuals who are poverty-stricken, uneducated, people who are on the corner, homeless. That is not the case. Let me give you one of the realities of life. And I found this once I got clean and still stood and pastored at my church and started ministering. My name became good gossip in the city, which promoted things and allowed me to minister to more people who were suffering from the disease of addiction, because I was exposed. And so therefore, the lie is that only uneducated, poor people become addicts and alcoholics. The reality is that the overwhelming majority of the drugs and alcohol that are consumed in America today are consumed by the middle and upper class individuals. And in my book, the second one, Beyond the Pipe and the Pulpit, I have a chapter in there, chapter 11, on suffering in silence. Um, one of the worst things that can ever happen to any individual is for them to be going through something in their life, and because of fear or because of pride or whatever it is, and they cannot or will not discuss it with anyone else, is the worst thing that can ever happen in an individual's life. I know about that. And to put it in proper perspective, at the end of my addiction, I wanted to die. Being a pastor, couldn't talk about it with anybody. The only people who knew that I was an addict were individuals that I was getting high with. I was getting high with people who were like judges, attorneys, school teachers. I wasn't getting high with average John Q. American citizen. I wasn't copying drugs on the street. And so being in my church, my people in my church did not know what I was doing. I found that out when I came out of treatment. They didn't know I was an addict. They didn't know I was an alcoholic. I didn't drink around them. I smoked cigarettes, but I didn't smoke cigarettes. They knew I smoked, but I mean, I didn't smoke them, right in their face. My life is a testimony of not only what drugs will do to you, drugs and alcohol will do to you, but it's a testimony of what God can do in me. And if you suffer from the disease of addiction, or if you have a family member who suffers from the disease of addiction, and you need some help and some hope, you can go to my website, which is www.hopealiveoutreach.org, hopealiveoutreach.org, or you can call me 443-250-9635. I have a radio broadcast. It comes on, they call it Heaven 600. That's 600 on the AM dial in Baltimore on iHeartRadio. It's been on since 1992. It's still operative today. Why? Because it's poignant, it's powerful. I interview individuals who were recovering addicts, and they tell their story. I travel and do keynote addresses. I speak to congregations, speak to churches, and do book signings to give the message of hope, to let people know that there's hope. Because it's a terrible thing, it's a terrible feeling to want to die because you don't know what to do. And so suicide becomes an option. People commit suicide because they feel this is their only way out and they can't bear it anymore. I know what that is. And so if you have somebody in your family who I talked to a man, I talked to a minister this morning on the phone. I called him for another reason. But I had spoken in his church some years ago about addiction, and I used the word of God to get people's hearts and minds open in the church. And afterwards I did a book signing, and he was telling me how effective my being there was, and how this woman had been delivered, and how she's now doing great because I was there. And I was sharing with him about how people in the church, even pastors, are suffering at times. And this brother, and I've known this man I've known him for some years. And I said, I let him know that, I said, hey, even somebody who suffered from the disease of addiction, somebody whose family suffers from the disease of addiction. And he said to me, yes, especially when it's in your own family. And it's like God just moved just like that. And he said to me, I'm going to get open with you. And he told me about his brother. And I listened to this man for 15 minutes talking about his brother. I said, well, how old is he? His brother's in his 60s. And how he's been a problem to the family for years, and how he even ministered to his brother, how his mother ministered to her son, because she didn't want to see him out in the street. And so there are people who are suffering in silence. And this man has invited me to his church. I ministered in his church, but he never told me about his own brother. But I know that the devastation that can happen when you are a practicing addict yourself and can't get any help. But if you live with your relatives, I mean, if you have 6 people living in your house and one of them is an addict or an alcoholic, they affect everybody's life in that house. All right. And so, I mean, I know what it is to be drug addicted and not want to live, wanting to die. Toward the end of my addiction, living in Baltimore was they call it the heroin capital of America. People dying all the time. But now, right now, in America, and in Pinellas County, there was an article in the Tampa Bay Times about a month and a half ago talking about how the drug problem, the overdose problem had declined all over America, in every state in America, except Florida. That says something. And here in Pinellas County, every 43 hours somebody dies from an overdose. We have people who are so strung out on drugs and that they don't even care about the fact that fentanyl is killing people. It's killing people every day. Every day. Some addicts are actually going out here on the street and buying fentanyl.